So good afternoon, everyone. Steve Perrin from IBM. I recently published a book on the cognitive vehicle, kind of what maybe people knew as the connected vehicle. And I'll be talking a little bit about that today and how it relates to dealers, how it's been changing OEMs, and certainly how it's going to be changing dealerships. So how many folks, are on the dealership side? Just one dealer? What, two, three? And then what else do we have? So other vendors? F&I. What's it? F&I software. Okay, software. Okay, great. So what I'm going to talk about first is, and actually my co-author, we use a term, or you might hear me talk about, or you might see on some of the slides, this term automobile, right, with the capital mobile, right? And that came from, if you traditionally look back at the industry, and in almost kind of what you see today is, it's really a very product-focused industry. And so he kind of coined this, capital auto, right, around this original kind of life cycle. If you see and understand how products are developed, they go through development, production, sales, and then after sales. Pretty straightforward, not just for cars, pretty much handles the whole world of physical things. And the industry has been changing, and everybody could see that. His first book was on the business processes, very detailed things that OEMs would have to do and have to understand as they change to this more automobile with the mobile capitalized, right? And obviously you see this with things like Uber and Lyft and Car2Go and sharing and subscription. I met a company doing subscription management this morning. But what that's basically changed is now there's this understanding and more of a focus on after the car is sold, right? So what we call digital production integration or value-added services, things they're doing beyond the sale of the vehicle, right? Tesla, you're going to just see more and more of this. I think Tesla was really the first. There might have been other variants of it, but they're like, buy more horsepower, right? By going on the internet and downloading the software. So certainly that had been done with maps and other things like that, but there's just more and more of those things. And some of those actually maybe in the future in some more configurable models, they would even allow the dealers to put their own packages in, more like you see in the commercial vehicle space. They were talking to somebody before that was in camper side. So I'll stretch a little bit into kind of the fleet and commercial stuff as I'm talking as well. And recording all right? Yep, good. Those vehicles tend to be more configurable so they can handle different loads or whatever. And again, that I think plays into dealerships and what they can provide as services as well. So how did it all start? Just kind of take people back, kind of put things in context, kind of where things started and what the focus was on the customer at that time, and even how dealerships were even integrated at that time. So, hey, has anybody been in an accident with OnStar or had the airbag go off and been notified? Small crowd, no one. But that's the three buttons. Plus typically with that type of service, you have the automatic crash notification. Very safety focused. Thinking about the customers, selling safety. If you think about OnStar, certainly the GM's biggest brand around this. A lot of focus on safety. But one of the first things they did, and soon to later integrate, was into their call center. You could call and say, hey, I have this problem. What does that mean? Oh, you should, this light went off. What does that mean? Hey, that's not good, you ought to pull over. Would you like me to call a tow truck, get you some roadside assistance, and I can get you set up with a dealer if you're close to home or if you're on the road, and get it over for a dealer for service. So we don't have many dealer folks in here, but be curious to see how many kind of remember or understood what kind of service business or whatever they were getting from this type of interaction. Because they, the OEMs weren't doing this just to be cool. I mean, ultimately, certainly as you see more, and I'll talk about more, things like Alexa, things like the personal assistants on the phone, they're trying to interact and provide a much better service for you. So, the OEMs, even back then, this has been 15 years or so, we're thinking, hey, how can I interact with my customer more? How can I have a relationship with them more after they've bought the vehicle? Then we kind of went into this generation, or really it combined with the 3 buttons. I think I still even have 3 buttons, or at least 1 button in my car now. But we started to see kind of that navigation system, right? Actually, first brought aboard by Garmin in an aftermarket. If everybody remembers, they slapped up the thing on their dash. I mean, who didn't buy their mom one of those, But there was also, along with these systems, there was a couple other things that also involved the dealer, right? And I remember doing some work for Honda back in 2005. It was called AccuraLink, if there's any Honda people here. It's called AccuraLink. And they were some of the first to broadcast some messages, information, quick tips, reminders, kind of feature things about the vehicle down to the car. So it wasn't just navigation, but kind of a term they call infotainment as well. But dealers were also involved in that. They had dealer points of interest that were appearing on the map. They always wanted to highlight if you were around a dealer. You could see that point of interest on a map. Still on my, you'll hear about my Audi that I just purchased that has a lot of cool new features as I talk about the cognitive vehicle. But it still has even this feature, right? So sure enough, and you can actually turn it on and off if you want the Audi dealerships to pop up as points of interest. But even back to the Honda system, that was one of the first ones that even integrated the first Bluetooth phones. I mean, this is like pre-smartphone and a lot of that as well. But when the DTC went off, you could actually have connect the Bluetooth phone. It would talk to Honda, find out what the problem is, and even, again, schedule a dealer appointment. So the OEMs were always thinking about CRM, even a long time ago, right? And I see a lot of, CRM here in the show. And again, back to that point of how do I keep that relationship after I buy? I saw a lot of stuff there that's all that marketing and kind of pre-sales, but really CRM, as OEMs are looking at it, and as I think dealers need to look at it, you really want to create that kind of 360 view, right? You want to take care of the customer, throughout their life. And I'll get into some more examples of that as well. And then now the future. And there's maybe some little steps in between, but I kind of have a version of this. I said I'd talk about my Audi a little bit. It has what's called the Audi Virtual Cockpit. It was one of the first 2 years award-winning navigation, infotainment type system. But it's very much, if you haven't been to the shows, some software type people here, maybe been out to Consumer Electronics, or if you've been to any of the auto shows, or you're starting to see it a lot more in some of the newer models, right? Everybody knows about the whole Tesla kind of center thing, right? But I mean, I can change what's behind my steering wheel. I can see Google Earth. I can move it over here. I can see my songs. I can set it up. I have heads-up displays, right? So they're really trying to improve, again, now I think a better focus on what the customer sees or interacts within the vehicle, right? Also, of course, related back to CRM. So when there is an accident, or if I'm low on fuel, or if I have a problem, diagnostic code or something, I can get assistance and it's going to pop up. Well, that hasn't happened yet, but sure enough, when my fuel goes, it like automatically pops up and says, hey, do you want to find a gas station? Click yes, yes, boom, then there it comes up. Nice internet service, shows me the cheapest gas, but of course Google's getting money for the, having their little icon, and Chevron's paid them to be at the top of that list, right? Whether it's sorted by fuel price or not. So that's some of the commercial stuff that's really happening now in kind of these future systems. And then the other thing what's really around that, right? As I talk about this kind of cognitive vehicle, and I'll define that a little more, but what's really going into their thinking, right? What's behind all of these future-looking cockpits and all of this, right? And this happened to be, we actually based a lot of stuff in the book around this as a framework, and it really started with, and everybody's familiar with, and it's been in the news a lot, right? All this self-driving, right? The autonomous driving stuff. And, you know, all of a sudden now, very unfortunate that somebody got killed. I mean, not surprising. I mean, people are killed with automobiles every day, whether they're autonomous or not. But one of the big drivers was, you know, this kind of hype, and these companies have hyped all of this self-driving, and everybody's thinking it's prime time and it's ready to go and it's all that. But there's actually, if you know SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, right, they have all these kind of standards, and there's like 5 levels. Everybody's thinking and talking about 5, and of course the press likes to talk about 5 because 1 and 2 are pretty boring. But the reality is we're really around 2 and 3, right? And the stuff that's going on with these trials and whatnot, you know, the reality is the responsibility is still the driver, even though the car is in this mode, right? He is still, you're insured to be driving that car, whether the car is assisting you or not. And there's certainly going to be changes in regulations, and I don't want to talk a lot about autonomous driving, but there'll be a lot of things in the future, certainly with regulations and restricted areas and these kinds of things, you know, because of ultimately all the situations they'd have to handle to really deal with a car that's on its own, or you could just say, hey, go pick up the kids at soccer practice, right? But that gives you an idea of what these self things are about, right? The OEMs, I think dealers as well, are starting to think of, and you'll hear me also use this term, personal mobility experience, but they're really starting to think about the person, right? So, and even going back to the other cockpit type picture, if I think about that, and I see what I have in the Audi today, it's still not personalized for me, right? So that's kind of the next step of that. So that's something more like self-configuring, right? Personalizing and really creating something more like what you do on your phone, right? I mean, who would want a phone if all you could do, you know, was, you know, maybe download another app or something, right? No, you want a phone so you can do what you want and move the screens around and all of that. So a lot of those types of things are going to, you know, start to happen more and more in the vehicles. Even in one of the cases, we kind of really started thinking far out, you know, as far as a level 5 type scenario, in that even parts would be printed at dealerships, right? You could do custom 3D printed doors and, you know, different aspects of the cars. You think about how those, a physical car may look and may be customized for somebody. Self-integrating, another example. You see this a lot with the Audi case that I explained, with dealerships, gas stations, you know, airports, traffic, right? All of this kind of integration with all of this digital information that's out there. And that's only going to keep, you know, improving and getting more and more changes throughout the years. Self-learning, that's, you know, you kind of hear about learning in the sense of, you know, what an autonomous car has to do. So if you've been in any of these cars, I did the little, what did she have? Virtual reality down there this morning. And they were talking about the lane assist. And a lot of cars have that. Of course, how that system learns is different than, you know, say how a cognitive vehicle learns. Because even, again, I had the example where I left the Atlanta airport, I was on my way home, and the navigation automatically popped up and said, there's traffic on your way home. I never touched anything, right? So it knows, I live in Augusta, so it knows if I'm in Atlanta, I'm probably driving home. And it popped up that message, and I was able to reroute myself. There's a couple options from the airport if anybody's familiar with Atlanta. So again, that's very much so it's learned some of my patterns, right? And is now using that. And you see that a lot with Google and Waze and some of the other products that are out there. But that gives you an example of more, real live example of kind of self-learning. And more of that's going to be used as far as commerce, where you stop, if you drive your kids to school every morning, if you go to work every morning, do you stop for coffee every morning? All of those types of things, the OEMs, want to capture on that and want to understand how to create a personal experience now around the driving. Self-healing, like I said, back to the Acura Honda system back in 2005, and with what OnStar does, and probably certainly the biggest connection. I think X-Time, I saw them that we originally integrated with that system for scheduling the dealer appointments. But self-healing and this whole idea of making sure the car doesn't break down, right? This is huge. Nobody wants their car to break down. Nobody wants the inconvenience. Of course, the dealer wants the service, but dealers really want happy customers. They want customers to come back, right? So you have to think about that overall experience. And then self-socializing, that's kind of really what you kind of see with Waze, kind of this really dynamic crowdsourcing. Waze information is kind of pulled together, so not only can you know about traffic, but somebody can post where a cop is or where an accident happened or whatever. Google does that in different ways, and the cars in the future are even going to do that more and more and start sharing information among themselves for those types of scenarios as well, to make them, even better than counting on people to enter that information on their own. Because if I can automatically detect an object in the road or know when it's the end of the traffic jam, then that's a much better service for the customer than somebody waiting and posting it on Waze or something like that. Some of the other future things that you've probably heard about or hearing about related to the autonomous driving is the HD maps and how really the maps need to improve. The great example, I just came back, I was on a 2-year assignment in Japan. Incredibly complicated road system over there. At times 3 lanes right above each other. So, looking at a kind of a 2D, Google type map, it just really doesn't cut it. They still kind of do it in 2D on their maps, but they're of course much better at handling it there than a Google phone that is really not used there. But what's going to really happen in all this, and this really isn't hype, this is reality. But it will be coming out. Part of that will be used to assist the autonomous driving systems. But the main part of it is really understanding that, and I've talked to some of the tier 1 suppliers, that they can get such accuracy that if you understand GPS and location just like you have in your phone, that it even has to compensate. It will get so accurate, they'll have to know if GPS is on this side of the car or that side of the car. Actually, where is the antenna, right? That's how accurate it'll be. Because ultimately, these new systems, and with HD maps, you get incredible accuracy. And with that accuracy, they can build and do a lot more with what's going on, and not just location, but as you see there, things like curb heights, potholes, electric poles, all of these kinds of things. Again, the Audi already has the traffic sign recognition, so you're having a lot of video and that's already getting captured and understood. That will start to be incorporated. You'll still have 2D maps for driving and how you kind of see it, but the systems themselves will have a lot more detail, and this will kind of be the foundation of, or some of the incremental things you'll start to see really before you see autonomous cars, or you start to see more what's called ADAS, or advanced driver assisted systems, like the lane assist that was down in the demo downstairs, or what they call traffic jam assist or adaptive cruise. Those are all ADAS systems. Those are going to be a lot more popular and a lot more prevalent until we see these kind of level 3, level 5 kind of stuff. And And of course, if anybody has questions or comments, you're welcome to ask them during. I may save a little time at the end, we'll see. And now the other thing that's really happening, so we've talked about the display, we talked about what customers are seeing, how that's changing. We're talking about the maps, how they're going to get more detailed, have more detailed information, understand dynamic changes in speed limit. Great example with all this construction around Orlando. It can pick that up and now tells me it's that, not what the posted speed limit is for that road. But now let's talk about the personal assistants. And that was really kind of the foundation to the book, was around how these personal assistants are going to become, and the brands behind these personal assistants are going to become very powerful. So everybody, I'm sure, has heard. How many people have Alexa? We got one, couple. Oh, we got a bunch. Cool, cool. Bunch of Alexa. And then, of course, everybody's got the different types of phones. But the interesting thing that Alexa has done, well, number one, is brought it into the home, right, versus just what's on the phone. It's quite debatable. I'm personally one that would probably get my phone out and say something before I would, just say it in the house. But I kind of travel and, not home that much. But, so there's always different ways. But they've done a very good job with, bringing something, as you see to the left, something inexpensive, one, right? And two, a large ecosystem, or what they call skills, right? The different things that you can add to these personal assistants. And then now, switch that back to the phone, or kind of look at this price analogy that we're making across the top, right? What's Alexa doing? What are the phone companies doing? And now what are the automotive companies going to do? And there's a quote here from Mary Barra. She's the CEO at General Motors. She thinks there'll be more changes in the next 5 to 10 years than the last 50 years. And the personal assistant, we think, is going to be a big part of that. Now, how many people have, how many Apple CarPlay, or what is it, Android Auto users? We got a couple of those? So that's the new feature for those that don't have it, that you can actually plug your phone in the car, and it's basically called projection, is the simplest way to describe it. Your screen is projected. It's not perfectly projected. It's done, of course, with driver distraction in mind, but it's the new way for the phones to work with the car. And that's quite nice. Now, before that, so that allows you, of course, to make your own Siri commands and talk to your phone as well and make your phone calls, the whole hands-free mechanism. Bluetooth does that as well. Now, how many have used have a car that already has a speech system in it today? Yep, got a few. Not so good, probably. Actually, still, just talked to some Honda engineers before I left Japan. Still, the top J.D. Power initial quality survey feedback, the speech sucks, right? I mean, and why? Because they're comparing it to Alexa and Google. I mean, all these other things have come out now, and the poor people in the car, those systems were built, oh my God, some of them, Honda is still using, actually, in some of their cars, is still using some speech that was built 15 years ago. So, or not quite, yeah, actually 15 years ago when it launched. So, those systems they were kind of called command and control. You basically set a command. Question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when do you think the automakers will either give up or move to some sort of mobile platform themselves? Because like I've got a couple cars, a 2013 Honda, and the nav, everything is completely obsolete.
Yeah.
My iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's got a brand new 2018 Kia, and it's up to date now.
But we'll soon be, yeah.
But in a year or two,
Yeah.
it'll be out to date. And you see the price points. I'm okay with my Alexa getting out of date because it's 30,
Yeah,
40
yeah.
bucks. My phone, I replace every couple of years, like many people do. But the whatever $80,000 car, or even the $30,000
$1,000 car, yeah.
no one's replacing it every 2 years until you maybe
Yeah, it's a big debate.
I just want to plug my phone into
Yeah.
the car, and then if I go somewhere, I plug my phone into another car,
Yeah.
and I want the car to be like a shell instead of some super expensive, out of date.
Yeah, so they're gonna, like anything, the answer is yes and no, right? So yes, that's why Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are quite popular. And I mean, as far as an adoption, I couldn't even believe how fast after that was announced that pretty much every new car was coming out with that. But to give you an example, back to my Audi, it's Google Earth, so it's as updated as it is for your phone. So they are trying to do things, and they're always going to have levels, but they also have to understand there's always going to be some level of what they have to do that they can't rely on your phone to do it, right? So I also like to think of the analogy, and there's already been analogies, and we talk about this in the book. I didn't put the slides in here on that, but when I talk about cognitive life a little later, you actually look at where am I going to have all these interactions, right? So you're already having on your phone, and then Amazon brought them to your house, and now, say, Audi's brought them to your car. Oh, and actually, Alexa at CES just did a thing with Panasonic and brought that seamlessly into the car, right? Actually, it's mobile with Ford. They announced the previous year because, to your point, it's a little easier to do it with mobile. But they're doing some of those things to keep, you know, part of it that they will always separate as what you call kind of OEM or very car related, away from what they say is phone related. So even mostly the entertainment. So I find this already. I'm counting on the cool Google stuff because it's got great online stuff for when I travel and want to stop and eat, or just say, you know, now I can say what the system never did before for the people that had the really old speech systems in the car. I couldn't say Orlando Convention Center, forget it. I mean, no. So I just said online destination, Orlando Convention Center when I left the hotel, and poof, you know, I'm there. So there's that, but I find the phone I use for entertainment, you know, and actually they're already kind of getting categorized. Google's very known for travel. Alexa's very known for commerce. Siri, you know, Apple entertainment, right? They're already kind of getting categorized. And the other ones are kind of trying to compete and get into the other one's spaces at the same time, right? But I still think the phone brands, specifically Samsung and Alexa and Amazon, are in great positions to be touching you all throughout your life. Think about, if you didn't know, Samsung, of course, has appliances. I think you can pretty much see those in any Home Depot or Lowe's. But they own a tier 1 supplier called Harman. They're the leading supplier of those units, the future units that you see in your car. They're, of course, already in the phone business. I think they even make homes in Korea. That's another thing. But, and then the other piece was Bixby. So they acquired Viv, which was the company that the guy that did Siri, left Apple, started Viv, and then Samsung bought them. So that's how serious they are, and Bixby's new, but that's how serious they are about understanding this whole voice thing. And you're going to see it more and more in the car. And as and you'll see on a slide a little later, you have to understand, I think it's important for dealers to understand, or anybody that understands, how do you want to play in these ecosystems, right? Because you think of the skills as you see it with Alexa now. Are you just going to be, hey, call my dealer or you know, and schedule an appointment, right? Could you make a skill? I'm sure a dealer could actually make a skill and put it into Alexa, right? Or do you want to have some other kind of interface? I think some OEMs are going to be stronger with the dealers in doing that, and you're already seeing other OEMs go to the complete edge of the spectrum, like Tesla, and not even have dealers. So there's quite a dynamic range there, but great question. So a little more on these personal assistants, and what really, and so I use this word cognitive, and I talked in the beginning about a connected vehicle going to a cognitive vehicle and how these things are really changing. And what's the fundamental thing behind that? And that's, you know, it's kind of, well, really what's behind Alexa? It's a skill. It's something somebody sets up. It's actually a great ecosystem. very powerful. But to really do natural language and to really be kind of the ultimate personal assistant, they're going to have to ultimately enhance, go kind of the next level of an Alexa, go kind of towards where, say, Bixby's going, or certainly Siri's going to improve. And because you have to start to get other information and have context. Now, Alexa can do some things because it knows it's probably in your house and you've set up things about it. But when you're going down the road and you want to ask a question, you don't want to necessarily have to say in relation to where you are or where you're going. That's the context. So that's getting information and having that so that you can use it while you're in the conversation. The conversation, or what they call the AI part, or the artificial intelligence, is taking that away from commands. That's actually the biggest problem with the ones that are in the cars today, is they're still very command-based. You have to learn the whole menu of things to say. A little less with Siri, a little less with the other ones, but ultimately more and more there's going to be more what they call natural language systems, where you can just say any phrase. You don't have to remember the exact command to say, order pizza or whatever it is for your particular thing. And then along with that, ultimately, just as Amazon has done certainly the best job, is to get the right ecosystem behind it. You can kind of see at some points where Siri's limited when you ask Siri questions. I mean, Siri can't tell me anything about my car. So what are if I just ask Siri right now, what's my tire pressure? Somebody freaked out the other day when I did that. Because it doesn't have the context. It did understand the natural language, but see, it's not integrated with the car. It doesn't have the data. So it doesn't know my car. I can't say, what's the tire pressure in my car? It doesn't know that. And it doesn't have the interface to the car. So that's where the OEMs and even some of the aftermarket solutions that dealers can put in, provide and could enable different businesses or promote businesses and relationships for a dealership. I was actually surprised, back to my Audi, for whatever reason, I don't know, it was already in that particular car that I picked out, but it had an aftermarket ODB device plugged in. Everybody knows ODB, that little port, right? So basically, I have two tracking systems and two things that are going to tell me when the engine goes bad and all of that. So that shows, some dealers thinking, and that was a nice year subscription, I forget, or actually, it's, I think, for the life of the car. I'm not sure, or at least for the first owner. I didn't pay much attention to it because I had the Audi one app, but I'm like, wow. But ultimately, it's there, I think, again, for the dealer to understand, know a little bit about their customers, and create that interaction, again, around that just simple thing around the DTCs and getting the appointments. And we'll talk about a couple of those other examples on what some of those things, the car sharing, ride sharing, subscription, the company, I'll just talk about them a second. I'm not selling them, by the way. It was just a great example, but Karma's down there. There's a lot of other shows on, I don't know them, or I'm not invested in them or anything. I'm just simple example of this subscription idea. Most people don't know about subscription as much as you hear about Uber and Lyft and the car sharing and ride sharing stuff. But that's where you just, hey, I want to use this car for a month, or I want to use it for a week. So you're buying on a subscription basis. So, and we'll talk about that a little more as well. So cognitive life, and that's also kind of where we talk about this. We kind of use the automotive industry and what we understood about the automotive industry and what's happened, because it's something that's been connected for quite a long time, and how that's really going to start to affect other things like an Alexa. So, Alexa is, in a way, as they start to get towards cars and doing other things, which I'm sure Amazon will do, they are very good at creating that kind of ecosystem and wanting to be at the center of not just your commerce and buying Tide, right? But helping you with hotels and airlines and transportation and, even these new, or events or eating, right? So that's what we call cognitive life. So we try to use this example not just for what, has happened and kind of where ultimately the automotive industry is going, But ultimately, this term Internet of Things, people have probably heard that term too. This is that whole, hey, I'm going to connect my toothbrush and all this kind of stuff. But it's just, it's cheaper and more things will be connected than there were before. But things have been connected. The Internet of Things has been around for a long time. They just have a cool new buzzword for it. But in that, you're seeing this, what other product companies, back to kind of the first picture, and even dealerships, right, have to think about in this really kind of new connected world, right? Are you going to have, I saw some apps down there that maybe customers could have, or that they would use, through a sales cycle, how you can have that relationship. But you really have to think, and I've got some strengths and things here at the end we'll talk about, but you really start to have to think about that customer experience and where you want to be in this, right? Because, these personal assistants, and this was in our opinion for the book, right, are really going to be at the center of it, and you can kind of already see that with Alexa today. But it's not quite touching everything today. But Apple CarPlay, all of those things are getting better. Sure, they'll probably open up different aspects of, you were asking that question, CarPlay will probably be able to do a few more things because it's already changing your speaker volumes and all of that stuff. So they may allow a little more as they, fix the security issues in the car and, control things a little better. They'll allow the phone to do a little more. But so you'll start to see everyone into that, right? And then ultimately, that's where we get this kind of personal mobility experience, right? What and how, I think what the, and ultimately, which was the title, right? My Cognitive Automobile Life, right? Because really, even some of these car companies and a lot of product companies thought their product in the car was the centric thing, right? Well, that's gone. It's big. It's just so evident that it's there already, right? But we kind of called it our automobile life or cognitive life, as I was saying before, because really the vehicle is now part of my personal network, right? And I may use it, like I did to drive down here. I still may use an Uber, but it's far less that dominant thing that, most of us versus our kids. How many have the kids that don't have a driver's license? I love that one, see? There's tons. It's crazy. 20-some years old, and no desire to get a license. Been in the city, not leaving the city. Are you in the city? No. Oh no, there's 20-year-olds, kids in the city. I even have friends that of course he has a driver, but he hasn't had a car in New York for years. So
yeah,
question.
You've been kind of brushing around this, but I guess my question is, what do you think this means in terms of selling cars? Because kind of the DNA of the entire thing is changing because of this ecosystem, right? So
yeah. So. Yeah, so you were like one slide ahead. Yeah. But yeah, let me see if there was anything else I wanted to say on that one. But yeah, this whole idea of this personalized mobility experience, or thinking about your life a bit differently like kids are, yes, is ultimately going to affect how people are buying. If I'm a dealer, am I going to say, hey, my business is going to go down next year? I think they said the growth of vehicle sales has plateaued. It'll still be 3% or something, but it's plateaued, right? Because ultimately, you still have population growth and these kinds of things, but ultimately, they think it's not going to grow at a greater rate than that, right? And that's why there's this whole point back to what the OEMs are going to have to change. I think it applies to dealers as well. They have to start thinking about, right, these value-added services and other things they can do, right? Like the subscription stuff, maybe like rental cars, maybe like an Uber, maybe like a Lyft, right? Because there's definitely advantages to having a spot, right? As I mentioned, the guy said, oh yeah, we like subscription. And because that's a hub-based. Obviously, you're not going to do a car-to-go, car-sharing type thing, and it depends on if you're a rural dealer versus a city dealer or whatever. Different dynamics are going to create different things for that. But, some of those aren't as set up to be as managed. But you still go back to what do dealers do well, right? They service. A lot of dealers understand fleets. They deal with a lot of the, truck, van type stuff. Look at all the aftermarket and services that are available that actually the dealer can be a part of. And it's like even how those, certain parts and everything start in those little fix-it shops. Then maybe the OEMs pick them up, then dealers pick them up, right? But now I can get my bed sprayed and I can get a new stereo put in and, these kinds of things, right? So it's the same kind of thing is going to happen, I think, also now electronically, right? Because you may want this different type of electronic experience, or you want a fleet, you say, yep, here's your core fleet tracking. I can send the data to your fleet management system and, you can do your dispatch and whatever. But I can provide you that core service, right? Or I can provide you those cars on a weekly or monthly basis.
Well, just a question on that too. When you're talking about having a car that's totally personalized, you get in, all your stuff's hooked up. You're trying to get that 25, 26-year-old who might be rideshare because it's his stuff. It's personalized completely. That's how you're going to compete with that.
Yeah.
I don't want to call somebody to get a car for 30 days. It's not mine. I don't have all my own personal plug my phone in. Whatever. It's a one-touch deal.
Yeah, he actually brought it up with a point he said kind of slipped through there, right? And you're trading, in a way, you're doing two things. How are you talking about a personalized, kind of really custom vehicle, and then the fact that you're going to ride sharing? But he brought it up already, and the OEMs are looking at this, right? Whether it's the key, you see a lot of it now with this. I don't even know half the things this damn thing does. I just, no time to read it and figure it out. But if that worked between multiple cars. But you are going to start to see and want to talk to your OEMs about that. So how you can personalize it, or as he said, that kid's going to want to get in his car, right? If it's not CarPlay, plug something in so he can have it set up like he wants. And you honestly are going to start to see that. It's kind of an extension of what you see now with this idea of the key and these kind of...
For example, you can jump into an Uber and use your own Spotify to listen to music at
Yeah.
the Uber. And I can imagine that being extended to all sorts of things if they're already on the phone. And the cars become shared.
So, yeah.
Then any car I jump into would potentially be a customized car.
Yeah, I was talking with, who was that? It was quite interesting, Mazda, I think. Because ultimately, there will be car companies that turn into making shells, right? Because even as you really look out with autonomous vehicles, look at planes, guys. I mean, come on. It's all about the interior. I mean, because ultimately, a true level 5 autonomous car is going to be incredibly regulated as well, just like planes are incredibly regulated, right? So it is going to be, we like to use that word shell. Somebody said it. That's kind of the thing. And then how do I go in? So you need to think about, be on top of where that's happening. Look at the aftermarket stuff, just like you did when it was spraying bed liners, right? To now, how can I meet and deal with these new digital customers? And how can I create this brand? Am I going to have a strong OEM that's going to help me with brand, or ultimately may want to cut me out? Or do I want to kind of create a dealership brand, like Hendrick and Charlotte? I mean, holy cow. I mean, that's what and NASCAR and whatever, right? That's a brand. Has anybody ever seen one of these in another city? I just know this one from Tokyo. But yeah, that's a dealership, right? Well, actually, it's not a dealership. It's called Mercedes Connection. And they have cars there, and they show cars. I went to look at some before I came back. And they obviously have an arrangement with, or at least the local Mercedes guy. But there's people there to show you the cars, but it's coffee shop, restaurant. I mean, that's really starting to think differently, right? I mean, I've even seen and read some articles about, get rid of the service lane and how can you change service. And I think I have some, or at least quick comments on that, because I just have 5 minutes. Back to that cognitive life, and, kind of that centric view. This is, Apple's done it, proved it. Everybody talks about it. But it's how do you act on what you want the customer experience to be? What are you getting from your OEM? Or how do you want to create your brand? You've got to do that really. And this is the point which I didn't see a lot of just walking around down there real quick this morning. Duration of the relationship, right? Yeah, if you just want to sell one car, that's fine, right? But if you want to sell and keep and build a relationship, Everybody is doing that differently because I mean, I've seen this whole phone thing, and I'll talk about the digital divorce thing even before I get to that page. But this phone thing is so powerful. We added this part to the title of the book called Digital Divorce from Your Cognitive Personal Assistant, because I thought, wow, I really like Samsung. I just wrote a book, and this is really cool. But man, would I ever leave Apple? But look how strong they've made that brand and everybody's connection to that. So constantly think about that customer experience. I mentioned some of the aftermarket stuff already. Another thing that you'll hear about, I just talk about this for a second, is data-driven. That's actually like this case we were just talking about, where how do I bring my data, my experience into the car, right? You're here, we're kind of in this software update phase now, right? Where I can update maps, I can update ECUs, you know, there's all this kind of software-defined stuff going on, but it's going to be more about data in the future. So you'll start to hear about that and think about that as well. And when you think about these mobility experiences, right, and you think about a dealership, you know, and kind of remember too, and what people comment, I finally went into one actually in Tokyo. I'd never been into one before, IBM. I just signed up, poof, poof, the phone shows up at my house. So I never kind of went through the whole Apple Store thing, but wow, they've really done a good job with that, right? Because you think, you know, and when you start to think about the customer and you think like Apple does, you know, you really start to realize, you know, is buying a car a good customer experience today? You know, or is getting insurance, is maintaining it, is parking, right? Is trading it in? Are all those things good customer experiences? I mean, how many dealers like to probably go do it? I mean, you know, or have their wife go and to another dealership or get a different car. Those just aren't great experiences. And that's what Apple, and when you think about the stores, that Mercedes example, or you think about the other example, you know, you see that how and what that means when you think about customer experience. So when I think about dealers, they're the ones that are interacting with the customer. I mean, why do you think Tesla and Apple and a lot of companies are talking about branded stores? Because they want customer interaction. If you have customer interaction, you can get a lot more information. Don't even talk about what Visa and your bank knows about you. But they're being very smart about that data, and they're not going to have a Facebook situation, I can assure you. But that's what you get when you get retail and customer interaction. You have a lot of information about your customer that you can really use. So you have the sales side, you have customer interactions. Fleets, I talked about that one a little bit. And then you build that relationship and locale. Again, that sense of community, those things that are very good. And then, of course, service. I mean, no matter what, autonomous cars, battery cars, all this stuff, that's all still needs service. How can the future dealer think about that, integrate himself into that type of environment? And I think in some cases, like a low-end car that will be really just the phone and no maps, to a high-end car that, you know, is paying for 5G and Google and all of that. There's going to be the variance of those things, but you know, service for sure is going to be around and going to need to happen. So I'm just running a little over, and just this last point, and I mentioned it about Hendrik, and I already explained the digital divorce. I mean, how can I leave Apple, right? And so of course I didn't. I bought another Apple phone when I got back, but that was the interesting kind of analogy and how powerful now those brands are. I mean, you're not going to change. I mean, and it's going to happen. People are going to become you're going to see these Alexa homes and that don't have Apple TVs in them and that kind of stuff. And you're going to start to see these Samsung homes, and then Samsung that ultimately carries it to many parts of your life. And hopefully dealers and other folks that aren't in the dealer community will be a part of that as well. So I can stay around for questions, but thank you very much, and enjoy the weather.